time once again to discuss things.
Especially because video games are, more so than any other entertainment I've seen, really based on your mood. And if you have to wait for that shit to install for 4 fucking hours, the mood's gone.
Yeah. Alright. You ready to go ahead and get started here?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen. I am Sid2. Joining me today is...
Oh, I thought you were going to, introduce with a weird name thing.
I don't know. I'm getting a little tired of that.
Okay, cool. I just fell into the pattern, so I wasn't sure.
Joining me today is...
Steve.
There we go.
Hooray. Nailed it. First try.
First try. We are closing out Horror Month. This is the last normal episode of Geeky Gentlemen on Horror Month. There will be a special episode uploaded later today. But we are ending Horror Month with our last character discussion. And Steve, who are we discussing today?
Today we are discussing the fiendish gothic monster created by Dr. Frankenstein. Frankenstein's monster.
Okay, so what happens if Frankenstein's monster gets his degree?
I knew someone
would
make that joke after I saw that on Twitter. It's too
yeah. Like what do you call him if he gets his doctorate? What do you call him?
Dr. Frankenstein.
Dr. Frankenstein's doctor monster.
Dr. Frankenstein monster. DDFM.
Yeah, there we go. No, it's funny, about a year or two ago, Comics Kid and I did a video just talking about whether or not it's okay to call him Frankenstein, and since, all of the subtext is that he is Dr. Frankenstein's abandoned child, yes, it is fine to call him Frankenstein.
I don't understand people being Nazis about that shit. It's cool. Call him what you want. Just make sure that in conversation you can distinguish between the two. It's cool. Either way.
Yeah, it's Frankenstein and Dr. Frankenstein. Or Frankenstein and Victor. It's not that hard. It's such a silly freaking thing. It's this snobbish attitude of oh, actually, it's Frankenstein's monster, because Frankenstein was the doctor. It's just I just want to throw a battery at people who say shit like that. And so no, all the subtext says yes, you can call him Frankenstein. There's this great little blurb someone wrote in the end of a Frankenstein novel where they're as he faded away into the ice, I could hear him say, "Oh, by the way, it's cool if you call me Frankenstein. I really don't mind. Bye."
When you repeat this story, just keep it simple.
Yep. Oh.
Frankenstein's monster was so much more chill about things than Dr. Frankenstein was. People don't seem to understand that.
Pretty much. So anyway, besides the name of Frankenstein, what is something that we can talk about with Frankenstein?
Well, so I guess part of where we can go with this is the reason why we picked Frankenstein's monster to end on, because we got into this whole discussion of what the final character topic should be, and I didn't want to do Pennywise the Clown just because it'd be kind of dull since everyone's already on their It Parade, despite it being a really good movie.
Yeah, we don't want to be topical or timely or anything.
No, exactly. That's it. No, we're way too much hipsterish for that. But
yeah.
But I like the idea of talking about something that's a horrific cosmic entity being kind of thing. Something that sort of personifies a lot of what we're talking about by its very existence. And Frankenstein's monster is a really cool way to do that. More so than even stuff like vampires or Dracula. Not because Frankenstein's monster goes first in any chronological order or it's the best monster or anything, but just because I think Frankenstein as a novel and Frankenstein as a monster captures so much of what we could talk about in individual monsters really, really well. Like what makes Frankenstein's monster scary is that really beautiful middle ground between he's physically characterized as a movie monster, but then he's also that more artsy modern horror thing of he's just people.
Yeah, that's a really good point. This is why I like the Mary Shelley's Frankenstein movie so much, is because it is the only thing that does, the Frankenstein story properly, where it's like, not only does he just like kind of learn a little bit and kind of sort of understand how the world works in like a childlike perspective, he straight up becomes like a, philosopher. He is just as smart as Frankenstein. And
yeah, dude reads books and shit and comes back to his master and is like, look, what you did was fucked up.
Yeah, totally. I really, really like that about it. And so it is interesting that Frankenstein's monster is, in an interesting way, the thing that makes him horrifying is the ambition of man and the inability to cope with or handle the consequences of that ambition.
Yeah.
Like a lot of other monsters.
Less so about the playing God thing and more about like the whole notion of like Frankenstein's monster is the more along the lines of like how you corrupt what you touch, and in so corrupting you read that corruption as godly creation, and that's problematic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I mean, I really like how much Frankenstein's monster as a monster is really the most tragic aspect of that whole book, and I like how you can interpret that sort of like savage vengeance as at the same time like rightful justice. In my X-Men First Class video on Magneto was entirely from that perspective, just because I thought the idea of him calling himself Frankenstein's monster is the most beautiful twist you could throw on that character, because it's literally what that novel's about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's interesting how, Dracula kind of serves as this metaphor for sexuality, and the Wolfman for just like animalistic side of man kind of thing. Frankenstein's monster is the intellect in a really, really profound way. Again, the thing that makes Frankenstein and his monster interesting to me is it's not the whole, it's a, brutish beast that doesn't know any better and killed a child or whatever. It's that he is so damn smart. And it's like, it is dealing with the consequences of creating life. And so all the metaphors about like childhood and parentage that go into that story is really, really fascinating to me.
It's really got that fantastic late 1800s edge of how do you justify life? Like, how do you justify the fact that we exist on this world, and is life a thing that needs to be propagated or not?
It's a very existentialist monster, isn't it?
Exactly. I mean, because it's right in between that space of Nietzsche's about to die and existentialism is about to come into fruition in France in the 1900s. So, like, it's perfectly in between.
Mm-hmm. And then there's other just like interesting things about Frankenstein, the novel that just put it in this really dreadful place. Like, I think it's called, I'm trying to remember the name of the volcano, Krakatoa, something like that. One of the biggest volcanoes ever to erupt in recorded history, spit so much ash into the air and the atmosphere that it circled the globe for several years, but the immediate year following, there was no summer. It was like, cloudy and relatively cold the entire summer in England at the time. And so that's when Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, was in that summer. And I just... something about that seems so perfect, right? Like, that's when this comes, is when we're dealing with, what is it like to live? What is happening around the world? How long do we really have left? Like, there's all this fear of death And then there are these people, like, of the time saying, oh, well, you know, here's our plan for the next volcano, and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, you're shit out of luck. You can't control nature in this way, and if you could, you'd have no idea what you're doing, and you'd probably fuck it up worse.
Well, and see, that's a really good way to frame that, because part of why the book exists is out of that challenge of, like, write the most terrifying sci-fi novel you could think of.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, the idea that this book is science fiction at all is really interesting, because that whole controlling nature thing, that whole tagline of modern Prometheus, what's the scariest thing a person can do with the tools around them? And it's create life.
Yeah.
Try to create life.
Yeah, and it's interesting because Mary Shelley doesn't go into a ton of... Like, the book is just filled with tons of detail about the most irrelevant shit. But what she doesn't go into detail about is the process Frankenstein uses to bring life to the monster.
Yeah.
And that's because she was legitimately afraid someone would try it.
I mean, I wouldn't put it past humanity to try it.
Yeah, but, like, how messed up is that you have this whole novel that's about, you know, don't reach too far, there are hard limits to what the world should be like and what people should be able to do, and this is one of them, and I'm going to show you why with this character. And how bad is it that she has to go, okay, but I'm not going to tell you how I'm fictionalizing someone would do it, because I don't want you to actually try.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the first third of the novel really goes into depth about, like, the kinds of science that Victor Frankenstein likes and what he's attempting to do, and his sort of, like, process of reading old stuff and going to a university and learning that everything he read was outdated and learning more stuff. So, like, for the time, it's got, like, a good contemporary spin on, like, what sciences would be. And so to intentionally skip over that's really apt, because you could have had almost that Sherlock Holmes thing of, like, now you're going to reciprocate a field of study that you do not want.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, well, that was really interesting. That was a neat little road.
Well, the other thing I think is fun to talk about is I think one of the best works of art of all time is Paradise Lost, the poem/novel. And Paradise Lost came out, what was it, like 1600s, maybe? I'm bad with dates. I really have no idea.
I think it's 1612.
Is it really? Okay, yeah.
If I remember it
early
correctly.
1600s. But, like, so, if I remember that right, like, Paradise Lost gets referenced a couple of times in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and I really like that notion of Frankenstein's monster sees him...
1667, sorry.
1667. Okay.
Yep.
All right, so yeah, this would be, like, at least 200 years before Frankenstein.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, so okay, then that makes sense. But I really like the notion that Frankenstein's monster refers to himself, like, he goes back and forth between, like, he's the Adam, the sort of, like, the new species, the sort of, like, prodigal son, to being, like, Lucifer, being the fallen angel. And, like, he sort of, Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster sort of alternate back and forth between how they sort of see what their creation is. And by the end of it, the sort of self-determination that Frankenstein's monster feels like he's owed goes away because he realizes the conditions under which he was born. And that's a really cool parallel to Paradise Lost, because that book makes God out to be the bad guy in a really interesting way that I don't think people picked up on when it was being written, or when that poem was coming out, just because it was the 1600s.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like that. It's like that sort of, it's a very specific thematic interpretation of Paradise Lost in a really unique way.
Yeah, and it's also interesting because I don't know if people are trying to be clever, or if it just, you know, like, okay, well, he created life once, so we're going to have him do it again, but this time it's going to be a woman. It's interesting to see what was done after the fact. Like, what else was handed down with trying to franchise Frankenstein just as a whole, and so we get, like, The Bride of Frankenstein and all this stuff, and it's like, well, he becomes aware of how cruel his conditions are, and then wants to impose that upon someone else, just so he's not alone. that's... I feel like that is a lot smarter than the initial premise of The Bride of Frankenstein sounds.
Well, I mean, it's smarter in the book when he actually tries to have a bride and he sort of learns his lesson in the middle of it. When the actual Bride of Frankenstein movie is not quite there, because I don't think that monster ever learns anything. Mostly because he is just a monster.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I mean, I haven't actually watched the old Frankenstein movie, The Bride of Frankenstein, the sequel.
I have. That was a very early episode of Geeky Gentleman, actually.
Okay, yeah, I haven't seen that since I was like 5 or 6 years old. Like, it's been years. So, I don't know how...
You mean you don't have a perfectly formulated opinion of it?
I don't.
You call yourself a critic. Get the fuck out.
A thumbs up or thumbs down. But I from what I understand, as opposed to remember, I don't think he's like a fully fleshed out character that learns his lesson in that one. He's more like a child that just gets run out of town, so to speak. And so Bride of Frankenstein, in that sense, isn't as interesting as it is in the book, because in the book, he comes back to Frankenstein as being worldly and aged and knowing that he deserves happiness, which is why he creates a bride. But then from that process realizes, oh, this is why even I am a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, I think, ultimately a lot more complicated and a lot more interesting in that short form. Not that you can't franchise it out. Like, I think a really good modern Frankenstein story is Tom King's Vision.
Oh, too soon.
That just stings, doesn't it?
Yeah. First, I'm praying that he had a soul. First I'm praying that robots have a soul. Then I'm praying that Viv has a soul. And then I'm praying for his soul to be at rest. Oh, come the fuck on.
But it really is.
You can't do that to me.
From page 1, it's like this happy family, and you're like, there is something so wrong about this. And there is always something wrong in that story.
Yeah. No, I mean, you're not wrong, though. The implication of I was created by a man as a new form of life. Now, what do I do with it? Like, what the fuck is up with the person that thinks to do this? Like, oh yeah, I'm just going to create a new form of life. You know, it's whatever. Like, there are guys, and, you know, it's so fucked that this is a thing that's actually happening. There are guys in labs across the country trying to create the conditions to create a universe within our universe, and they don't see any problem with it because, and I love that this is their rationalization, well, it won't be a problem because it'll just expand, and because of the nature of how we believe the universe works, it will create space for itself. It won't rip our space apart. And it's like, so their only, like, understanding of any possible problem is, oh, well, it won't rip apart our universe. Well, there's this ethical concern of literally being God here.
What is your moral responsibility to that race? And will it power a battery for your car like that Rick and Morty episode?
Yeah, no, like, seriously. You create an entire universe. You are then, in my mind, responsible for everything that happens in it. Jesus Christ, what the fuck is wrong with you?
I can't believe anyone would even try that. That is literally the dumbest idea I've ever heard. No, just
you can look into it.
Not think you can doesn't mean you should, damn it.
And that's the whole point of this goddamn book. And, like, I just want to, like, find the labs that are doing this and just send them, like, you know, a box of Frankenstein books. And, like, all the movies and everything, and just, like, get your shit together. Just like I want to send... there's so many books I just want to send to people. Like, I want to send Nick Spencer Denny O'Neil's Wonder Woman. I really do.
Oh, yeah. That'd be fun. That would be so beautiful.
Like, there's so much shit like that. I wish I had the money to just spend on that. But, like, the notion of creating life is really... you know, integral to Frankenstein. And, you know, this is a bad movie. But Frankenstein really ran with that in an interesting way. And just, unfortunately, it was complete crap in execution.
Frankenstein's not a good movie. It's based on an alright comic, which is kind of worth reading, but, like, only kind of.
Yeah. Like, I really like the idea that was at the center of that, which is man creates life. The devil wants to know how so that he can be better than God. And it really ties in with what you were saying earlier with Paradise Lost, wherein Frankenstein is a modern Lucifer in this version. That's just a really, really, neat idea to connect those all together, because of course, if the devil can create life, then what do you need God for? Like that kind of ultimately proves, Lucifer's point in Paradise Lost. And I don't know, I find that like a really, really interesting idea.
Well, and I also really like, if you're gonna like play into how Frankenstein views himself and his relationship to like things that are inherently good or bad, like a god or Lucifer, it's cool in principle to have a somewhat confrontational meeting between, like, say, Frankenstein and Dracula, or the Wolfman, or like whatever horror movie monster you can think of. Like, campy fun aside, I feel like there's a really interesting, cool, serious story with Frankenstein like drifting off into the ice and landing in Transylvania and meeting Count Dracula and realizing that the way in which he was created is not the only way to sin against life, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like you could really do something fascinating with that, particularly because Dracula wouldn't necessarily have a way to kill Frankenstein, I don't think.
I mean, it is that question of, like, can Frankenstein become a vampire?
I mean,
can Frankenstein become a werewolf?
Can Dracula become a Frankenstein monster?
I mean, that's a weird question.
Well, have you ever seen Trick or Treat with, like, the cult of vampires that are basically werewolves? It's really bizarre.
It's been a while.
Yeah, but I don't know. You get what I'm saying, though, right? Like, what would their, like, dynamic be in that more serious sense?
Yeah. And, there is something you could do there, and it's a real shame that the Universal Monster movies can't seem to get off the ground for a shared universe again, because I would like to see this. It could be fun and cool and interesting to see this all done right.
The new movies have the right tone for it. They're just really bad.
Yeah. I haven't seen The Mummy, so I can't say.
Don't watch The Mummy. Just don't. I mean, you and I are both less harsh on the Luke Evans Dracula movie than most people are, but God, is The Mummy bad.
Oh, that's disappointing. Ah, damn. Okay. Anyway, So,
sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. You go.
I was just gonna ask if you have like a favorite version of Frankenstein outside of the novel, and not like cheating and saying like Magneto's my favorite Frankenstein monster, like specifically Frankenstein.
I know you don't care for it, but I really like Robert De Niro's portrayal in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the Kenneth Branagh movie.
That's fair. Peter Cushing's Frankenstein's kind of scarred into my head from watching those movies as a kid, so I can't think of anything that tops that, really.
I mean, it's hard not to... I cannot believe we did not bring this shit up. It's hard not to just go with Young Frankenstein.
Oh my god. Young Frankenstein is easily the best Frankenstein story, period.
It is really good. Like, Bill always had the best summation of that movie, which is Young Frankenstein is just a really good Frankenstein movie that's also really funny.
Yes. No, it's fantastic. I love everything about that movie.
Exactly. I mean, I'll be frank with... I'll be Frankenstein with you. I'm gonna use the Transylvania Lullaby as the opening to this episode.
Please do.
Ooh, that felt good.
Well, weird. Is it just me, or is your hump on the wrong side?
What hump? No, but like I really like Young Frankenstein too, because like just the way in which that plays everything out of like, okay, Frankenstein's, what is it, great grandson,
Something like that,
is brought back and completes his ancestors' work and brings the monster back and understands all these things and just goes down the exact same path. But he knows how to save it at the end of the day, and by giving his brain to it. It's really cool. It works really well with the tone the other Frankenstein movies have. I guess the reason I say Robert De Niro is because that is the one that is the most tonally interesting, where it's like, I mean, maybe Van Helsing's is the only other Frankenstein monster where it actually is anything like the book, where it actually gets smart.
I mean,
isn't just a bumbling child.
I'd agree with that, particularly because if just looking at that history of like 1990s, not 1990s, 1900s adaptations of Frankenstein, and sort of the creation of the 7-foot-tall giant with a massive forehead and bolts in his neck thing. Mm-hmm. The monsters, basically, that whole sort of like dumb lumbering creature sort of idea that I never really cared for.
Yeah, I mean, it works on some level to get the idea of it is Frankenstein's son in a way that, like, he never really has. I guess that would be my only complaint with Young Frankenstein, is I really do not like the idea of Victor von Frankenstein ever being able to have children. I think there is something really interesting that the only way he passes down his lineage is through the monster.
That's interesting. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, I think that, like, it's maybe it's just headcanon, maybe something's played with this idea before, but yeah, I think that that Victor von Frankenstein, maybe through his experiments in trying to create the monster, has made himself sterile.
Well, there is that undercurrent of sexualization Victor Frankenstein has in the book, where, like, the way he describes scientific experiments is, and the kind of passion he has for that is always completely counter to how he describes any relationship he has with any person, particularly people that he finds attractive, where, like, it's almost like a sterile sense in his relationship with everyone he's with until they become in danger, and then when it comes to his laboratory work, he's more human than anything.
Gotcha. Okay. So I don't know, what else can we talk about? Favorite Frankenstein design? Because I actually really like Frankenstein being green.
Yeah, I don't mind Frankenstein being green. I think the design they got in the Mary Shelley Robert De Niro thing looks pretty good. That said, like, just flipping through old horror movie pictures, the way he looks in that old 1931 movie is actually really good, I think.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think the designs for all those original movies got, pretty much the iconic version of it down. I don't think there's any really getting away from it. I just know some people like to debate it, like, oh no, he should be white like a corpse, or no, he's never been green, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I like green. It's sickly, it breathes of him not being human in a really profound way, of being something new, and I really like that about him.
Well, and there are versions of Frankenstein, like there's a comic, there's a ballet, there are versions of Frankenstein that really play with his appearance. The really in your nose racial theme one is there's a children's book. It might be it's like a picture book. I don't know if it's actually a children's book, but it's basically a children's book where it's Frankenstein, but Frankenstein's a black man. And so, like, it plays with it in that more intellectual way of, like, everyone hates him, and no one can really explain why. It does have that sort of weird theme of, white people did not create black people, so maybe you shouldn't do that. But it's an interesting idea.
Why do I feel like the author didn't realize that?
Yeah, see, that's what I'm thinking. I'm like, I get you were well-intentioned, but maybe you should have thought of this.
Yeah, that's always fun to find those ones where it's like, did you know that? Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, there's lots of
that's
stuff
some Zootopia shit right there.
Exactly like Zootopia.
Yeah.
But yeah, like there's stuff like that where, like, there's like weird scattered interpretations that do different things with appearance, and I feel like all of them try to justify it within their own universe to a degree. Like, I think the Victor Frankenstein movie, based on that Max Landis script, he looked pretty cool too.
Oh, see, I've not seen that yet.
Oh, okay. It's not good, but it's interesting.
God damn it.
It's entertaining. It's a Max Landis script. If nothing else, it's well paced.
Whiny and bitchy and annoying?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
Max Landis is a jackass, and I hate him. But he writes some okay dialogue, and if nothing else, watching Daniel Radcliffe and James McAvoy, like, witty back and forth in British accents, it's adorable, and I love it.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I've been meaning to check that out, because I remember looking at that and going, oh, that looks really interesting.
And it's not.
Based on just the casting. Okay. Well, I think that does it for Frankenstein. Besides recommended things, I guess I'd say, even though I don't particularly like the book itself, I just think Mary Shelley's kind of a too wordy a writer, but that's just that era.
It's an early Gothic lit.
Yeah. So, like, I guess I'd recommend the book. I really like the Kenneth Branagh movie, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Frankenstein has a cool idea. Watch, like, the first 10 minutes.
Yeah.
How about you? What would you recommend?
So I haven't seen the Universal movies in a long time, so my frame of reference is more like the Hammer movies. I really, really like Revenge of Frankenstein. I don't know, like, what the historical consensus of that is, or, like, whether or not it's considered a really good movie or a really bad movie. But from what I remember, Revenge of Frankenstein's really good. You don't have to hold me to it if you watch it and realize it's shit, but I remember really liking it. So there's that. I don't know if anybody watches Penny Dreadful. That's an interesting show. It's basically like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, except for Gothic movie monsters, where they're all kind of like inhabiting the same world. It wanes back and forth in how well it does the different creatures it uses. Like, I don't love their version of Jekyll and Hyde. But their Frankenstein's really interesting, and their Dracula's really interesting, and all of them kind of like inhabit that same space, which is cool. And then, let's see, Victor Frankenstein, a movie that we just talked about. It's not a good movie, like, by any stretch, but it's an interesting idea because the whole basis of the movie is what we have stereotypically associated with Frankenstein mythology was never in any of the old movies or the books. So let's just make a movie of what people thought they remembered. And that's interesting, because it's nothing but the cliches from the people who haven't read the book. The problem is, it's nothing but the cliches from the people that haven't read the book.
It's a zeitgeist Frankenstein.
Exactly.
Interesting. It's a Frankenstein of a zeitgeist Frankenstein script. Interesting. Okay. So next month, everybody, we are moving into Geeky Gentleman History Month.
Woo!
Yay!
Hooray!
We'll rant at you and tell you...
And corrupt school systems and all that shit.
Yep. We'll rant at you and tell you all about the stuff that you never learned in school. So we're really turning over what to do for characters next month. And so we're just going to go with this as the general rule for characters. They either have to be consistently in a very particular period, or they have to have originated from a point more than 100 years ago.
A point more than 100 years ago.
Yeah, their original work has to be more than 100 years old. So it either has to be, like, consistently set in a particular era. So, like, Jonah Hex.
Yeah.
He's always set in the West. He would be fair game, and so would the next character I'm about to say. Zeus, God of Thunder.
Oh, interesting. Your brain went in a very similar direction to mine, actually.
Yep, we're going to be talking about Zeus, the God of Thunder, King of Olympus. He's got about 1 million other things attached to his name.
We'll play child support times 1,000.
Yeah, exactly. We'll be talking about Zeus for the first character discussion of History Month. I was going to say Horror Month, but that's just ended. So everyone, thank you very much for watching. Until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
And I am the Exile.
And we are your Geeky Gentlemen. And we will be discussing things.